Hello and welcome back to the Broadcast Newswrap, your shorthand guide to the top TV news stories brought to you by the Broadcast editorial team. I'm international editor John Elms, and today I'm joined by a crack squad of senior reporter Max Goldbart, reporter Hannah Bowler, and insight editor Jesse Whittock. We've returned from our summer holidays with a bumper edition to discuss this year's Digital Edinburgh TV Festival, a novel experience for us all. But of course you can catch up with the back catalogue of the Newswrap on Spotify and Apple. On today's episode, we kick off with Max's exclusive interview with this year's Edinburgh Advisory Chair and BBC Two controller Patrick Holland, who spoke about David Olusoga's powerful McTaggart lecture, the ever-present topic of diversity in the industry, public service broadcasting, and Channel 5 Director of Programming Ben Frau's declaration that I'm not part of the club. All that plus the ever-popular What We've Been Watching on today's Broadcast Newswrap. And before I say hi to everyone, I'm just going to introduce Max's conversation with Patrick Holland.
So, Patrick Holland, Edinburgh Advisory Chair 2020. It's great to have you on the podcast. What have been some of your standout moments so far? We're recording right towards the end of this year's festival.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Max. So what have been the standout moments so far? I mean, obviously, the moment that everyone is talking about is David's McTaggart. And we know when we approached David about being the McTaggart lecturer, it felt like this was his year, and it was a moment when we needed his level of intellect, his level of storytelling, his level of analysis, his level of sort of being able to understand the structures that are at play, and to turn his historian's eye to our industry, his industry, but also to that he's someone who, as he said in his lecture, has seen television from many different perspectives, you know, as a presenter, as a producer, as a researcher. And so I had very, very high hopes for the McTaggart in terms of, you know, the impact of it being something that could galvanise the industry. But I've been blown away by the response to that speech, and the particular combination of personal testimony plus that analytical focus that he's been able to bring, I think, has to serve as a lightning rod for change. So excuse me. So I think that was the standout moment so far.
Were you it certainly does feel like this was a really important year to have someone like David doing the McTaggart. Were you surprised by any of what he said, or was it very much a speech that you were expecting?
I think that we knew when we approached David that his as I said in the introduction to the lecture, that his whole career on television, his whole sort of focus on in television has been on telling untold stories. So I think that we were always expecting David to be able to tell that untold stories, and then drive to a different conclusion, which makes us see things afresh. Obviously, I didn't know lots and lots of the personal stories that David was able to mine and to take us into, both his own stories and the stories of other people who, from his generation, the lost generation, as he described it. So I was expecting a speech of power and analysis. One thing that I think is the game changer is that if it can enable us all to understand the structures that are stopping change, that for all of I've been in television for over 20 years. I used to run Channel 4's new talent scheme. When I ran an indie, I set up a whole, within Fremantle, we set up an access scheme for researchers to becoming a trainee researcher scheme for people from diverse backgrounds to get into television. So it's something that, and at the BBC, I'm the point person for the assistant commissioner scheme. I'm really passionate about diversity. It's been something that is absolutely, central to lots and lots of the work that I've done in television for 20 years, and yet we haven't seen change. So I feel sort of personally quite ashamed that there has not been more change. David's speech, I think, shone a light on some of the structures that stop change. And so much of it is, and I said it in my controller session yesterday, so much of it is ostensibly quite benign. We hire people who were doing the last job. You know, when a new series comes along, you think, well, who are we going to get to make this show? And someone says, so-and-so's just won a BAFTA, so-and-so is in real demand from Channel 4. And so what happens is that person then gets the gig. And of course, if we always keep hiring the same people, things never change. And, you know, people talk, you know, Ben Frau spoke the other day about if there's not an AP on a particular series that he's commissioning, then, you know, then there's no commission. I think it's got to be more than that. We're not talking about APs. We're talking about series producers, talking about exec producers. We're talking about people who have got senior editorial roles on productions, because otherwise what's happening is that if you have minor roles that are filling that sort of diversity tick, and it's that is not the way we should be thinking about things. We're talking about changing the way in which we hire, promote, champion, mentor people, so that there are people who are in senior editorial positions as writers, directors, camera operators, editors, who are from diverse backgrounds, so that we're bringing fresh perspectives to our storytelling as well. This is not about, you know, just filling quotas. As I said yesterday in my controller session, it's about opening. It's like opening the window. You suddenly think, it's a different light that comes shining in, and that's what we need to, you know, embrace.
And in that way, sort of looking, you know, across the broadcasters and across the production sector, does it genuinely feel different this time? Because there's a lot of, I think that there is a lot of proclamations at the moment that it is different than it has been in past years, 10 years ago, whenever it might have been. There's also probably understandably quite a lot of cynicism from people who maybe have been in the industry for a while and feel like they've heard people talk about these things on panels quite often, and then each year goes by and the conversation sort of repeats itself. Are there elements of this that you do feel is a real call for change, and elements of this that you feel are different to past attempts to uproot this stuff?
I do, and I think that one of the reasons why I feel more confident than ever within the BBC is that the 20% quota that has been put in place, that is something that, you know, the reason why that's coming in next year is we're going to be working with the sector in order to describe what that means and to work out what the 20% means. So it's a very, very real part of the way that we are commissioning spec with producers.
I was interested. Ben Frau talked about not being part of the club in reference to other channel controllers and senior commissioners, partly because he didn't go to university. What did you think about that?
I mean, I think Ben loves being outside of a club. I'm not aware that there is a club either. I certainly don't go to a club and hang out with other channel controllers. No. I mean, I see that it's terrific that Ben, you know, comes from a background where he didn't go to university. But there are people who are, you know, I was the first person in my family to go to university. My mum and dad left school before they were 16, and there was no expectation on me whatsoever to go to uni. I'm very lucky that I'm doing the job that I'm doing, but I'm certainly not part of some sort of metropolitan elite club where we all sort of hang out together. I come from my background. I, you know, fervently believe in my values that come from, you know, my background, which is state school, you know, non-selective state school. And as I say, I was very, very lucky to get the breaks that I got. But I think that we need to understand that different people come from different backgrounds. There is a sense in television that there are too many people of a type, say, and that's where we need to understand that bringing in different voices, bringing in people from different backgrounds, is something which makes the conversation more interesting. Because otherwise we're just reflecting each other all the time.
Well, I think he said he'd spoken to you a couple of times, so you're as out the club as the next person. So he said he had a chat with Ian Katz on the phone once, and he's spoken to you a couple of times.
I went and had a very nice chat with Ben in his very fragrant office at Channel 5 when I took over as the advisory chair, to ask him what he wanted from Edinburgh for this year. He didn't tell me that he wanted to have the best studio set up in a lockdown Edinburgh, that he wanted to have a multi-camera shoot for his controller session. But no, it was a very good session.
And what else? I think clearly this, the theme of this Edinburgh is diversity. Have there been other key themes that you might have noticed come up in across various of the sessions?
Well, definitely from when I took over advisory chair, we said, we were talking about the advisory committee that we were able to gather, which was a real committee of talents. Was, I think, the most diverse committee ever. We were always talking about diversity and inclusion as being at the heart of the festival. But the other element that I passionately, believe in and wanted the industry to focus on for this festival is the future of public service broadcasting, because it feels like we're at a critical moment when, whichever side of the debate you're on, that we need to be talking about the public service ecology in the UK. So I think Tony Hall's, his address to the festival at the beginning, I think really helped set that up. There were some good questions yesterday in question time where we were talking about the future of public service broadcasting, not just the BBC, but also looking at, what does our relationship with the viewer look like? And it's all of this in the modern world, in the 21st century, but also this has been exacerbated by the debate about public service broadcasting has been brought into a sharper focus given COVID and given the Black Lives Matter movement, because who we trust, who we believe in, who represents our lives, who tells our stories, where we go to when we need information, that has never been more contested and questioned. And I think that's a debate that we've embraced and engaged with this week in Edinburgh. We've got to take that argument, I think, to the audience even more in terms of understanding that what public service broadcasting can bring to, in terms of telling British stories by British creatives, is an extraordinary part of our ecology. And you can look at SVOD commissions and you can look at the money that is available and think, oh, we don't need public service broadcasting anymore. But just compare the numbers between the hundreds of hours that SVODs commission from British Indies and the hundreds of thousands of hours or the tens of thousands of hours, that public service broadcasters commission from British Indies. And also look at the content that's on SVODs that actually was public service in its, when it was commissioned.
Finally, I suppose, what's it been like being, obviously when you became advisory chair, you never imagined that you would not be advisory chair in Edinburgh geographically. What's it been like trying to conduct all of this from home?
I think I'd say three things. First of all, that you can get a hell of a lot done on Zoom and you get a hell of a lot done on email. And so actually making time for it and making it work has been onerous, but has been, I've been able to fit it in with the day job, which I was a bit scared about, when I took it on. The second thing is that I felt that it was, I thought it's been amazing suddenly seeing this whole show unfold and this huge sort of variety of different debates and stimulations and engagements. It's been really exciting, and to see it sort of play out, from my spare bedroom has been surreal. But the third, and I know that there have been ways of us being able to talk about it. I've been texting people furiously all week. People have sort of been ringing me up and saying, I love that, hated that, blah, blah, blah. But I just really missed the interaction. And I'm not a big, as I said earlier, I'm not a big clubby telly person who sort of hangs out with telly folk all the time. But I really did, and sometimes I've missed Edinburgh. Sometimes you sort of, as someone in a sort of broadcaster, you look towards an event like Edinburgh slightly with a bit of, not dread, but with a bit of apprehension, because you know that you're going to be put on the spot. You're going to be sort of inundated with people coming and talking to you and saying, why aren't you commissioning my shows? So it's, as an event, it's something that you look forward to, but at the same time there's apprehension. This year, I just massively missed the physical event, because that ability for everyone to get together, as David described it, the tribes of television getting together, is an amazing moment. And it's in a moment when you realise just how many brilliant people there are in the industry, just how many terrific things are happening. I think we've seen that this week with the digital festival, but I think we're all really craving the time when we can get together and debate this, I was going to say in the flesh. I don't mean that. I mean, debate it, in person.
In person. Good stuff. Well, Patrick, has been great chatting, and it's been a really interesting week so far. So good to hear from you personally.
Thank you, Max.
So that was a great insight from Patrick there, touching on the kind of novel experience of having a digital Edinburgh. Let me say hi to everyone. How are we all doing? How are we doing, Max?
Very good. Good to be back.
And Hannah, how's it going?
Yeah, good. Just winding down, trying to get some sleep after the week we've just had. But less hangovers than normal, so we're not too good. We're not good.
And Jesse,
better than most years.
Seconded on the less hangovers or fewer hangovers point. It's been quite nice to be sober for most of the week. Although, as Patrick was alluding to, you do miss the sort of the late night chats and the gossip and then just sort of taking the temperature of the industry. So an interesting week, but definitely a different one.
Yeah. So just quickly, with those your takeaways, what was it like being at Digital Edinburgh as a grizzled veteran of the normal event?
Well, I suppose I first went to Edinburgh going on 10 years ago, it has a place in my mind where you go and you're able to get access to all of the top people in one place for probably the one time in the year where you can do that with the British TV industry. And then in the evening, you go and have a dinner with a broadcaster or with some friends or some sources, and you're able to sort of build up a really good picture about how people are feeling about the industry. And I do think that's probably the one thing that doing things digitally lacks a little bit, is that you don't have that sense, and you're having to sort of take everything from those sessions, which were really good across the board. I think it was a really strong, interesting week where lots of points were raised, but it does sort of make you ache for next year's event, when hopefully we'll all be back out there and we'll be able to be pissed at 2 a.m. outside the Grand, talking to some random actor or something about their latest show.
Hannah, were those the same experiences that you had?
Yeah, no, I would second what Jesse just said. I did though think though that the sessions were really well produced this year, and some seamless ways that it all came together, which was quite innovative, I think, for a completely virtual festival to have worked in that way. So I mean, hats off.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a good point. Obviously, these virtual festivals, we've done a few of them recently because that's what everything's been like. So it was well produced. Max, you covered a lion's share of the main sessions. Was that your viewpoint as well? How did you find it?
Yeah, a thirded, but it was a bit of a shame, wasn't it? Because you felt like you weren't getting the. One of the things I really like about Edinburgh is even just moving in between the sessions, and you see a bunch of people and sort of stopping and chatting and really getting a feel for how the key themes and how everyone feels about what people are saying, which was still you could keep your eye on the Twitter feed or we're chatting all the time, so there was still an element of that. And I think one real plus point that I found was that I just watched a lot more sessions this year than I normally would.
I would totally agree with that, because I normally
just kept it on.
in and out, or like you have to like schedule which ones you want to go to. And actually I found I went to like the majority of sessions, which I would have never been able to do before.
Definitely. And there was some, as we'll touch upon, there were some really interesting sessions, but I think stuff that I normally wouldn't watch of parts of the TV industry that maybe I don't cover or I'm less interested in was stuff that I was actually tuning into. So that's obviously a plus point, but I am sure they will be desperate to get back to normal service.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, there's lots of things to discuss. Actually, Patrick Holland, that conversation with Patrick Holland is quite useful because as the Edinburgh Advisory Chair, he gives us a kind of oversight of what's gone on, and obviously he spoke about, you know, one of the biggest talking points, which was David Olusoga's McTaggart, and we're obviously going to come back to that in a moment. But it was interesting that it was bookended. That opener was bookended by John Landgraf, the FX controller, as it were, head of FX network in the States, yesterday evening, who also spoke about diversity. I mean, his whole worldview address was about diversity. Max and Jesse, you listened into that along with me. What was your take on John Landgraf's kind of closing session to the Edinburgh? An appropriate and fitting speech? What do you think, Jesse?
So John's whole speech and whole conversation with June Sarpong was sort of built around this idea, or in fact the reality that 20 years ago FX, which is one of the kind of more sort of premium basic tier cable channels over in the US, made some shows like The Shield, some really classic stuff from around that time. It was basically a very, very white network. All the writers, all the directors, all the talent pretty much were white folk. And John, who, according to his Wikipedia page, is known as the mayor of TV, we were calling him last night the professor of TV, is this very studious guy who keeps a track on how many scripted shows are created every year. So about once or twice a year, he'll put out a statement saying there's around 500 or 600 scripted shows every year. So his research team are tracking all sorts of variables within the particularly the scripted world. And what he'd done when he realized that his network was one of the sort of worst performing in terms of diversity, there was a big report that came out in the US which ranked FX right near the bottom, if not the bottom. He decided to take a sort of scientific academic approach to changing that, and has been sort of mapping the progress that his channel has been making, and it's now the case that most of or certainly a majority of the people who work with FX in those kind of director, writer, actor positions are now, it's certainly minority white rather than majority, and the numbers are super impressive. He put out a load of charts, which I know you were tweeting about, John, so if anyone follows John, you'll be able to see in visual form what I'm talking about. But clearly he's someone who's actually gone out there and said, well, this isn't good enough. I'm embarrassed by these numbers. I want to change this. And he's taken this really scientific approach to changing it, and has done. And it's really impressive. I thought the session yesterday was great, and also kind of I really like June Sarpong's quite like manic energy. She was interviewing him, and she's obviously really impressed by what he's done, and it was a nice way to wrap up the festival, along with being like very insightful and quite academic. I felt like I've read more charts yesterday than I probably have done for about 2 weeks before.
Yeah, I definitely echo Jesse on June Sarpong was clearly prepared for that session, but was still so impressed by what he was saying. And I didn't really know very much about John Landgraf. I've recently got quite into FX because it has a really good output deal with the BBC. So I've watched some of these shows, and they are of such a high quality. I think the charts that we all loved so much, that were so telling, you could just never imagine a British channel controller or senior commissioner doing that. They would. There was a hell of, and we're going to touch on this more. There was a lot of talk at this Edinburgh, and we're going to see how well the people at the top follow through with it in the UK. But there was just something so refreshing about somebody heading up a big US network just being able to prove it and prove that he'd like smashed it out the park, basically, in terms of he brought up representation across the US, and then how that's improved regarding both directors and writers, and you know, they've smashed all of their targets. And it just, we talk about this quite a lot, but it just proves that thing that so many people say, which is, in the US they just get the business case for diversity in a way that we are so far behind. We still see diversity as something that you have to reach out to do. We still take a very scheme forward look at things. But some of the things John said, I'm just looking back at some of the tweeting we were doing. He said, we can sit here and talk about things from a moral viewpoint, but I'm telling you, this is what we do. There is a correlation between doing the right thing around gender and racial equity and the quality of programming. And clearly we all know that correlation is there, because he also, the next chart he showed was how many awards FX has won over the past few years, and how that's continued to rise. And I just thought, we are absolutely years away from any of those British channel controller sessions both being able to show this kind of progress and talking in this way, because they still don't talk about diversity from a business viewpoint. They talk about it from the moral viewpoint and from a societal viewpoint.
And Max, you wrote a piece based on Jamil's alternative McTaggart.
I almost wish that Jamil's alternative McTaggart had come after John Landgraf's speech. So it was so evidential of what he was talking about. She spoke a few hours before he did. But yeah, totally. She just talked about being completely pigeonholed in the UK. She was a T4 presenter and couldn't really break out from just being told that she was in that mold. And then she just went to the US and was allowed to do what she wanted. She starred in The Good Place. She did some writing, various other bits.
I think the pigeonholing was quite a common thing throughout the sessions. I remember presenter Maureen Begg talking about, as a presenter herself, she's constantly just given the stories that reflect like her race and her religion, and she was never given the freedom to do like a Stacey Dooley or a Louis Theroux, and that aspect of constantly being asked and pitch projects that reflect like your background, but other presenters, white presenters, aren't asked to do the same thing. You know, as a white presenter, you can go out and report about anything, and so that kind of really reflected how Jamil was kind of talking about that and how she then moved over. So it's definitely something that was definitely a theme throughout, I think.
Yeah, I think so, and I think wrapping that all together, that one of Landgraf's points was that when you diversify your network, and in his case FX, and the graphs were very important. I love a bit of data to like illustrate a point, because it's incontrovertible, it's right there. And he made a point. He data mapped once he had changed the kind of outlook from FX. Kind of precipitated by a really scathing Variety article, which kind of called out FX for being the worst. And he actually said, I was ashamed. I think it was really telling that he went, I was ashamed, you know, as the head. And he went defensive, but then he said, no, I can't be defensive. We've got to change this. From that moment, he obviously started to change it. And then he data mapped as he changed the outlook of writers, directors, and mapped it onto how many nominations and awards they got, as we've touched upon. I think FX put up 35 shows for the TCA awards and the Emmy nominations from 2015 to 19 post that article, and got commensurately more success than something like their bigger players like HBO and Netflix, who put up hundreds of shows. And he said that there is a direct correlation between diverse talent and success, which Max, you mentioned. And that's there on page, you know, the nominations is clearly shown. He's like, this is great. I've changed the dial on my network, and we're getting success, which is so obvious.
They would never talk about it in that way, and they would never show that sort of chart. And what I noticed, that the British channel controllers just name check the diverse talent they have. So without picking anyone out particularly, a British channel controller will just say, we've got this person on the channel, we have this person on the channel, we have this amazing writer. But you would never go across the piece and look at every program that you've commissioned in that year and say, look how amazingly we've done. Because I think it would tell quite a different story.
Absolutely. And it was noticeable that John Landgraf he didn't mention his shows, the shows that he has that represent diversity,
Exactly.
which people always go to for a good while. In fact, I think it was June Sarpong who brought them up. You've got these shows, and he was like, yeah, it's good. But he kind of, the point of his speech obviously is that they've started doing it, but they're only in the middle of the process, and there's so much more to do. And I thought it was very telling that his tone was quite, level for most of the session. But I noted that when he got questioned about the UK, or no, I don't think he got questioned. I think he just brought it up of his own volition. He went, the same must be true for writers, producers, directors in the UK. And he went, and his voice went up a pitch and went, they're right there. They just need you to open the door. And it was almost like he was baffled by the fact that it hadn't been done. So
is he? You guys would know this more than me, but is he streets ahead of other big US network bosses in terms of his attitude?
Well, broadly speaking, and this isn't true for every single network, but broadly speaking, the US broadcast system has embraced the concept of diversity much more sort of openly and quickly than they have in the UK. There's multiple reasons for that, but what is fair to say is even from like the most broad networks like ABC, something like an older skewed network like CBS, there is a lot of diversity on those channels in terms of the shows that they air, in terms of the actors, in terms of the behind screen talent, so directors and producers. So it's much more of a kind of inbuilt thing in the system over there, and it's arguably a tougher challenge over here to build that into the system. But they are definitely light years ahead of where we are. And I think if you look at something like Netflix, or if you look at HBO, these are broadcasters and streaming services that have had massive success building diversity into their business models. And that's probably the key difference as to what is happening in the UK at the moment. But we're starting to see it. There's absolutely, this is not a bashing session of the British broadcast market, because clearly the fact that Edinburgh has been dominated by this one topic far more than anything else shows that there is an acknowledgement of the problem, and that people are trying to do things. We've got Channel 5 pairing BAME-led indies up with commissioners to ensure that they win work. We've had various money committed towards programming from non-white producers and non-white background talent. So things are happening in the right way. Every broadcaster had some sort of announcement. So it is happening, but it's whether we can get to the point where it's so inbuilt that it wouldn't be a topic at another Edinburgh in the same way that this one was. That's the sort of question. I think Marcus Ryder made a really good point in the very first session, where he said 12 years ago, he went to Edinburgh and sat in a session which was effectively geared around, will there be a black commissioner in the channel controller in the UK? And he was chairing a panel that was called, will there be a black channel controller in the UK 12 years later? And he was making that point very clearly, that there hasn't been enough progress. So it's like moving in the right direction, but probably it still feels a bit too slowly.
Jesse, just quickly on the international front, because that's our bread and butter. What were your key takeouts from the international content perspective? Obviously, they would usually come in their droves to Edinburgh.
I mean, you wrote a couple of stories, John, which were quite interesting. One from HBO Max, which is one of the new streaming services, which is commissioning a lot of shows at the moment, trying to sort of position itself against the likes of Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus. And Jennifer Kim, who is the sort of internationals SVP over there, she talked quite extensively about how the UK commissioning community can help them do that. They have commissioned some shows with British producers attached to them already. But from what I could understand, she was talking, there is a real sort of co-production opportunity for British producers at HBO Max. My sense is the tariffs are probably quite good over there. They're looking to position themselves in a sort of that premium space. So to me, that says, dollar signs for British indies who are looking for new work, if you can find the right ideas and get that access into HBO Max. I'm sure the Commissioner Index will be updated, sort of reflecting some of that in the next few weeks. So you'll be able to log on to the broadcast website and find out that information in more detail. But obviously your story is already online, John. And A&E, which is a sort of long-time commissioner of UK content, we're talking about sort of potentially cycling out some of those formats that have been the bedrock of the channel. I mean, my sense is they're not going to stop making porn stars anytime soon, but they may well, they're looking to sort of add and refresh their slate of sort of particularly unscripted entertainment, and very much so it's the case that they feel Brits can help them do that. So those are, I mean, broadly in a week that wasn't heavily dominated by international conversation, I thought those 2 points were interesting in that there is clearly work out there for British production companies in America, and that hasn't changed due to COVID or anything else.
And now let's talk about another key talking point. That's something that really did the rounds on Twitter and even in other sessions. Ben Frau gave a very colourful and punchy keynote conversation in a Channel 5 studio, which I quite liked because it made him seem like one of those road guests on a morning variety show.
Yeah, he is a bit of a maverick, as he likes to be called. I'm not part of the club was an interesting line to take, and we've sort of heard Patrick respond to that earlier. I think it's something he said in the past. It's always notable at Edinburgh that he kind of, you feel that he has a little bit more free reign maybe than the other channel controllers to just say what he feels. And again, one of his main focuses was on diversity. And I think a wider point to make is that diversity really knocked all of the other topics off their perch. So the theme of this Edinburgh was actually PSB. I'm not really sure in the end there was too much focus on it. And if I look back to all the stories that we've written, they are a lot more diversity focused. And what Ben was talking about, which I really liked, is this idea that he will now be pushing back on production companies who don't come with enough diverse talent, both on and off screen. So his thing was that we don't need to throw millions of pounds at the problem. We just need to be really strict with our suppliers and not sign off that commission unless there is enough diversity baked into the show. Which I thought was really good. And then he showed a picture of himself dressed as Anne Boleyn when he was young, and then he said some other things. But certainly, I mean, yeah, I'm not part of the club's kind of leads to a wider discussion almost. And he talked about, I think I've spoken to Ian Katz once on the phone, and he also talked about an unnamed controller a few years ago who very patronizingly declared to him just as he was about to go onto a stage, it's amazing that you've got here even though you didn't go to university. And that's all very telling, isn't it, of the position that we're currently in.
I think the Anne Boleyn moment was voted the moment of Edinburgh, which shows how many people were tuned in and how many people were enjoying Ben's patter. But he was, within all of the kind of sort of theatrical nature of Ben Frau's performances in controller sessions, he does sort of pose these questions to the other controllers, doesn't he, about what it means to be someone who runs a channel. As journalists, we find Ben's approach frustrating sometimes, because we don't get the sort of press releases months in advance often with the shows that Channel 5 commission, because Ben's whole thing is about being nimble and changing your schedule. You know, sometimes, like, I've heard stories, whether they're true or not, from producers saying, I've had a call from Ben an hour before a show goes out saying, I want this change now, and and the show is still going on air in an hour's time, or I'm moving your show from 2 weeks time to tonight, you better get it ready. You know, this is all anecdotal, right? It might not be true, but the point is, he treats the schedule as something that is quite reactive and something that you can change, and that the structure of which doesn't have to be as rigid as many other channel controllers and broadcasters see it as. And you know, it's much easier to do that when you're heading Channel 5 than if you're running BBC One, right? The numbers are different and the expectations are different, but equally, someone who's posing questions about what it means to be a channel controller, particularly when we're having this wider debate around diversity and getting people who are not from those sort of traditional TV backgrounds, as it were, into positions of power, can only really be a good thing. And I think that, I mean, broadly, I think that's why his controller session resonated sort of more so than it even has done in previous years, where he's also, you know, said some quite provocative stuff. Also should give a big shout out to ITM Productions for that session, because it did prove the power of good production.
And Hannah, you mentioned that and a couple of the sessions that you were focusing on, he was brought up as a kind of, everyone was talking about it in session, so it kind of filtered through to other people's conversations.
Yeah, definitely. Noel Clarke went in for it, to be honest. It was pretty impressive. I mean, the session wasn't geared up to talk about diversity. It was about the changing times of drama. But again, like Max was saying earlier, every kind of topic did kind of get molded and reshaped, and diversity, as it should be, kind of became the main focal of most of these discussions. And Noel Clarke definitely gave Channel 4 and BBC a bit of run for their money. He said some very interesting things, and he was kind of talking again, which I think was a big theme throughout, and it's been said before, Edinburgh, I should mention, about this kind of changing the mid-level, and that's kind of where we need to start working on, is getting people to progress up the ladder. And there's so many schemes and things that help entry level, but how are we going to get people in those higher positions? And that was kind of a lot of where Noel came from as well, which I think is just, again, offering a more practical solution to things rather than just constantly talking about things. It's a very measurable way of doing and increasing diversity. Thinking across to a few of the other sessions, though, I remember in the Black Controller session, so June Jones talked about maybe if we could kind of have some consultancy roles, which I'd not heard come up before. And he talked about the fact that because diverse programming is actually very keyed on for young people, if broadcasters want to bring young people back into the fold and onto PSB audiences, then you need diverse programming, because that's what young people want to watch. So he was talking about, let's create some consultancy roles for BAME people, and they could come onto a production and say, you know, here's how to make it diverse, and you get that into the show and you'll get young audiences, and that just makes good business sense. So I thought that was a really interesting perspective that I hadn't heard come up before.
I just want to throw it open to the floor. You guys, we obviously were watching a lot of sessions throughout the week. I just wanted to give a kind of a free rein as the things that really struck you from other parts of it. Max, you've been percolating for a while. What were some of the things that you really took away from this digital festival?
Always percolating. I think, again, to say it for the final time, diversity trumped everything. And another thing diversity trumped is that today is Tony Hall's last day as BBC Director General. So he did the opening keynote on the Monday morning, and it sort of seemed to pass without majorly being focused upon. It was a classic kind of Tony Hall rallying cry about PSB. quoting Silicon Valley tech leaders. The only other thing that I would mention from my end is the BBC Three session. Fiona Campbell, channel controller BBC Three, laying down a gauntlet for BBC Three to return as a linear channel, and this is her first speaking appearance since that proposal has been floated. And it sounded, at first she slightly dodged the question and said it's under consideration, it's up to Tim Davie, the next DG, and then pressed upon it, she made a bit of a case for the fact that her thing was that the streamers would die for good linear channels, and the more linear channels we can have, and the more linear and iPlayer talking to each other is the better. So it seemed to me that once prompted, Fiona was really making a push there for BBC Three to come back as linear, and we've debated in the past the merits of that or not, but I found that to be quite interesting.
Absolutely, and a lot of that came from what the programming that BBC Three has been kind of commissioning recently and airing. And on that note, that slightly clunky segue, we're going into our favourite section. Well, the favourite section, our kind of most self-indulgent section. It's what we've been watching. Obviously, we've been watching a lot of TV of late, I hope. Hannah, do you want to kick off? What have you been watching?
I've just discovered Schitt's Creek. I think I'm late to the show. I'm not sure.
I am
so
too.
Just been binging that lately. But I know that there was a lot of talk around the show for being like not having any homophobia in it. And I've read up a little bit around that, and then watching it, I'm like, wow, it's just so unhomophobic, and it's amazing. And I'd recommend it all, to be honest, if anyone hasn't watched it.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm watching it at the moment as well. But go on, Jesse, you're a big fan of Schitt's Creek, but you've already seen that away, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. I just think it's like the most bingeable TV show, and it's just, I love the kind of unapologetic approach it takes to inclusion and just positivity. I think that's probably like quite an American, well, it's actually a Canadian show, but I think it's quite a North American thing to be sort of so kind of positive about something, but I just think it works really lovely. It's a really good thing to see, and I envy anyone who hasn't seen all of it yet, because then you get new episodes to watch. But I've been watching, what have I been doing?
Selling Sunset.
Well, I have been watching Selling Sunset. I finished that the other week. I think I described it on Twitter as something like the most like sort of vacuous but like fantastic TV show I've seen in some time. It's like, it's utter guff. It really probably doesn't stand for in some ways some of the things that we've been talking about here. It's sort of ridiculous Hollywood, upper class American lifestyle. That it's sort of promoting to an extent, but it's just like very, very funny and really well produced. It's made by the guy who did The Hills and Laguna Beach and things like that. And you can see it's like, this is a sort of master at work sort of series, whilst being like utter trash.
And Max?
I just finished Love on the Spectrum. That was very good. I don't know if
hero.
Have we talked about this before? Maybe we've talked about it before.
I mentioned it a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything. What was your take?
Really good show. I think it's still it's better than like The Undateables. By a mile. I still find it a little bit. I didn't know why they kept. They would always take an autistic person and put them on a date with another autistic person, and then put them into these very really awkward settings, like a really posh dinner with like loads of cameras around from the show. And I'm sort of like, is it any wonder that then there was lots and lots of awkwardness? Because I think I'd be really awkward in that situation. So at that point, it for me started merging into the slightly voyeuristic. I liked all the bits around that. I liked the backstory behind their families, and I thought some of the cast members were really great. My favorite was Michael. He was fantastic. He said he had a heart 10 times the size of the average heart, which I thought was really good.
Oh my God.
What a legend.
Huge heart.
Yeah. It was actually metaphorical.
If you're anyway as emotional as I am, the last episode will get you.
Yeah, really
that.
Good show. Really good show.
Absolutely.
And then I tried on the drama front, I tried watching A Suitable Boy on BBC One, but didn't think it was very good at all. I thought the was quite surprised to hear some really like boring, clunky dialogue, because it's written by Andrew Davis, and I always think of him as being quite a good writer. But yeah, I gave up after an episode.
Yep, fair enough. There is a lot of content out there.
Indeed.
A lot of content out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of content out there.
It's
God, I sound like a commissioner. I could sound like one of those TV. I've been in TV too long. Oh, there's a lot of content out there. Demand for eyeballs, etc. For what it's worth, I've actually been watching a Dutch show. I quickly, after the announcement that ITV2 had picked up Let Love Rule yesterday, I think it was yesterday or maybe the day before, called The Cabins. It's the latest relationship format from the wheelhouse of John the Mole. I watched a few episodes of the original Dutch version, which is on their broad channel SBS 6. I love it. I loved it. I thought it was great. It's really telling that if you watch an episode and you want to immediately watch the next one to find out what those characters, even though, I was watching with subtitles, do next or say next or follow on. I think that's always a good sign from someone who doesn't really watch as much entertainment programming and dating, social experiments. But I thought it was really good. I fear that ITV2 will skew a bit younger and they'll have younger couples. But the really great thing about the Dutch version is they had a kind of mid-20s couple in one of the episodes I watched, and a couple in their late 40s, and just the kind of the patter between the two were fantastic. It's just exactly the same kind of flirtation, but just in different stages of their life. So I can't wait till the UK version comes out, but I want to watch more of the Dutch one. So if ITV Studios are listening, send me more episodes of Let Love Rule in the Dutch version. That's all we have time for in this bumper edition. I say that's all we've got time for. We've been talking for a while, and it's been a really comprehensive chat about Edinburgh TV Festival. So thanks, guys, for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, John.
Cheers, John.
Cheers, John.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Broadcast Newswrap. Please make sure to follow us at Broadcast Now on Twitter and check into broadcastnow.co.uk for more analysis. I'm International Editor John Elms, and I've been speaking with Senior Reporter Max Goldbart, Reporter Hannah Bowler, and Insight Editor Jesse Whittock. Please do check out this week's podcast, plus all previous episodes, on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or via our website. And don't forget to tune in next time for more Newswrap, as we bring news and analysis from the television landscape. Goodbye.